Today we have gathered to discuss the holy questions of architecture. Before we start, hello, hi, good morning. Do I say hello?
Yeah.
Hi, hello. Can I just say I'm Julia? Do I need to say hello? I'm Julia Kappler, the Vice President of Kappler Inc., and we specialize in medical and dental architecture and interior design. My team wrote down our frequently asked questions. I have no idea what they wrote on these cards, but we're gonna go through these and see what they are. All right, question number 1. How does an architect know so much about dentistry? What do you even do? And how are you different than a consultant? I think I can talk about this question alone for about 1 hour, but I'm gonna keep it a little bit brief. I think that architecture is a huge world, right? There's so many different things we can design and build, but when you decide to specialize in one industry, you become a professional within that industry. Meaning we decided over 70 years ago to be specialized in dental and medical. So we don't have just the perspective of an architect, but we have the perspective of an architect and a designer. In addition to that, we have the perspective of how does dentistry work? How do medical practices function? And it all originally stemmed from us starting to producing cabinetry for these practices, where we had to understand the smallest detail of how a practice is organized. So our perspective comes from the smallest details to the bigger picture, as opposed to a lot of times in architecture, we start with the picture, big picture, and go to the details. So specializing in this industry as an architect truly gives you a whole different perspective than someone who loves building hotels or restaurants. Is a very, very meticulous and very different approach of how we view the design of those spaces. All right, next question is, do I need a social media wall? I think the team put this on here on purpose because this was a question that I always laugh about, because we believe we need to have one cool area in our space that people want to take pictures of. But I believe if we create a beautiful space, you don't just need a wall. Your whole entire space is made for social media. The whole entire space is beautiful. So no, you do not need a social media wall if you create a space that overall feels and looks amazing. That is something I will never give you. Next question is, how do you incorporate a natural feel into a space? That's a good question. I think if someone would ask me this question, I would probably ask a follow-up question of what natural feel means to them, because it doesn't always have to mean the same thing. To some people, they take the word natural literal, where, hey, can we incorporate natural elements like stone, greenery, things like that. So that is what they mean by natural. I would say that's how you bring it into the space, by actually putting natural elements. But there's also things like natural lighting. The best way to get that feeling of, oh, this is just a very comfortable space. There's nothing better than natural lighting in a space. So this one, I think, requires a little bit more context, but most of the time when I have heard this question, it was more about just the natural elements like wood, it could be greenery, it could be some stones. Just make a space feel less clinical, because you typically don't see those elements traditionally in a medical practice. All right. Do you think logo walls are outdated? I don't think that logo walls are outdated. I believe that branding is important, and that part of a design and part of our business is developing a brand, and your logo is part of your brand. Do I think that we should only pay attention to your logo wall? No, it's part of your branding, so I don't think they're outdated. It's just a matter of incorporating them in a beautiful way versus only looking at, this is a logo wall where I have my brand. Your whole practice should reflect your brand. All right, let's see what we have next. Can I really make something this beautiful even on a startup budget? I love this question because we get this question all the time where people see our beautiful practices, beautiful design, and they think, well, this must be expensive. And I understand where this stems from because we're not used to seeing beautiful spaces that are, let's call it affordable or approachable. The beautiful thing in design is that the colors, the finishes, the textures, they can be achieved in different levels of budget. Just because something looks beautiful does not directly mean that it's super expensive. Next one, what kind of lighting do you use in the ops and main areas? I will say overall, when it comes to lighting, obviously natural light is the most beautiful, but we don't always get a lot of windows where we can accomplish that. But generally, layered lighting, I believe, is the most important because when we only have lighting in our ceiling, the way it hits our face, the way it comes down is very, very different feeling than having different layers of lighting. And what does that mean? Layered lighting means you have light sources in different levels and heights of your practice. So a wall sconce, a pendant, that is how you create a more comfortable environment versus only having your ceiling lights. And in our operatories, back in the day when we didn't have items like our loops, where we didn't have the lighting on our chairs, the ceiling light was super important because it was your only way to actually see what is in the room. But nowadays that has changed, where especially if you do wear loops for your treatments, specifically in dental, there's not much other light sources that you need because that's all you need to see. So it really depends on the specialty. For dental specifically, you have the loops and the other areas, layered lighting. Okay, next question. How does workflow truly affect my design? I will say that workflow is part of design. It doesn't affect your design, it creates your design. Because if we separate function and aesthetics, we're not designing. We're just producing unintentional created spaces. To me, they go together because if we do not consider the workflow of a space, that is not good design, in my opinion. So they go hand in hand, and we cannot neglect aesthetics or workflow in order to create the design. We have to combine the two. This one says, what about acoustics? I am very concerned about sound traveling throughout my practice. Acoustics is probably one of the most important parts outside of lighting is acoustics, because we have to understand that we as human beings were heavily affected about what we hear. The noise around us, especially when we go into medical or dental practice, where we might not be super excited. We're not going to get our nails done. We're not going to a nice restaurant. We might have a treatment that is not as comfortable. So ensuring that our space also accounts for acoustics to create comfortable space is super, super important. And there's different ways on how to handle acoustics. One of them is using specific material to absorb the sound. There are really beautiful ways to incorporate that into the ceiling, which one of our signatures is the specific ceiling that we use that looks beautiful. We can create it in any kind of shape that absorbs the sound. And outside of that, it comes down to when we should build closed rooms with doors versus when we should have open areas. And it's not only about the materials, but acoustics truly starts with us laying out a space. Because, for example, if we build a reception desk and we put two people in this desk and one of them has a phone, does not matter how much sound we can absorb. If the patient enters the practice and one of the receptionists is on the phone, I can hear everything she's saying. And even though it might not be a loud room, it still affects the person in front of them. So acoustics goes beyond just how can I absorb the sound, but also where are certain things happening that produce noise. And that starts with our space plan and with our workflow. Right, we have another question. I love glass, but I am worried about privacy. Is there a way to have both? Good question. We love glass. in most places, just because, especially when we have smaller spaces, glass just helps you open up the space. When there is the concern about privacy versus the openness, one, it goes back to understanding why do we want to have the glass in the first place? Because there should never just be an aesthetic reason, also a functional reason. Let's say we want to create glass elements because we want natural light to flow into the space. Understanding. However, if there is the need for privacy, let's say it's a surgery room, patients are sedated, they lay down, and it's in the middle of the practice, we might not want glass. So there is ways to make glass translucent without making it transparent. There's decals we can use. There's blinds that we can incorporate if we want the privacy during certain times. But ultimately, I would always first think about what happens in this room that we want to use glass for, and then assess, do we truly want glass? Do we want to incorporate a decal? Do we incorporate blinds? Or does it maybe not make sense to have glass because we do need the privacy? So it comes down to assessing how much sense the glass truly means in certain instances. All right, next question. How long has Kappler been manufacturing cabinets? Where are your cabinets made? Oh, I love this question because this is how our company started. And we have been making cabinets since 1947. My great grandparents started as a really, really small mill workshop in a small town in Germany, an area called the Black Forest. And we still manufacture everything in Germany in that same area. That's where it all started. And I think we're going on almost 80 years. So it's a beautiful, beautiful path. We went from manufacturing cabinets to now building and designing whole entire buildings and spaces. This one says, why do you recommend single entry ops? This question is specifically for dental offices, and this alone can be a whole session about talking about this. I will say, speaking about dental offices, why we think that single entry operatories are an ideal solution for almost every specialty in dental is exactly the fact that there's no other medical specialty where you're having a treatment in an open space. That fact alone, knowing that there's no privacy during conversations with the patient because everyone can hear it. I can hear my suction, my drill in the hallway, and even as a provider, the same thing. We can hear everything from what's happening in our treatment room, what's happening in the hallway, what's happening next door, assistants running up and down the hallway to get to sterilization. There's no privacy and comfort in having open treatment rooms. And on top of that, there's a concept that, and this is a little bit controversial, but we are very, very firm in that belief, is that the concept of dual entry in dental offices was created many years ago, specifically in the US. There's not many other countries in the world that operate on this concept, are two things. Number one, rear delivery systems have been the way to operate in the US for decades. And if you have a rear delivery unit, it is really, really difficult for an assistant to get outside of the room while the patient lays down and your rear delivery unit is in use. So the natural response to that was, well, let's add a second door so that the assistant can leave the room. Number two is asking the question, why does the assistant have to leave the room? And that was our first intuitive question when we relaunched our single entry concept about 10 years ago in 2015, where we asked the question, why is this concept created that way? Why does the assistant have to leave the room? Because every time we would ask that question, people would tell us that second door is there for the assistant to leave the room. Most times, the response was, well, because she has to grab something. And our intuitive answer was, well, if she has to grab something and that happens all of the time, why is what she needs not in the room? So going into the details of all of that, what we said, instead of looking at a problem and give us literally a way out, how about we go to the root cause of the problem, which is disorganization in a lot of practices, and fix the root cause and organize and set up practices in a different way where we do not have to leave the room. Because ultimately, you can't just close the door and have a single op treatment room if you don't understand how to properly set up your treatment room and your sterilization to work with that system. And that is so, so important to understand, because if you just look at this concept but you don't understand how to truly utilize it, you're not setting yourself up for success. Our very last question: what do my digital and physical presence have to do with each other? Getting patients is one thing. How do I retain them? When I answer that first question first, I would say the simple answer is, if you create a brand, you want to make sure that wherever your brand is being mentioned, wherever you present yourself, whether it is in person, whether it's in print versus digital, make sure that everything is cohesive. Any big brand that you think about in the world, whenever you see any kind of advertising, you immediately know, oh, this is them. And that's what you want to achieve for your practice. You don't want to have a beautiful website and beautiful branding and then raise the bar for your patients' expectations, and then they come into a space that does not reflect that. On the other hand, if you only build a beautiful space, but then your social media presence and your web presence, your website does not reflect that, when patients try to schedule an appointment or they look you up online, your bar is lower versus if they come in person, the bar is here. So we want to make sure wherever the patient sees you, it always reflects that same feeling of who you are and what you stand for. The next question connected to this: getting patients is one thing. How do I retain them? I think as a business, no matter if it's a medical office, no matter if it's our business, retaining patients truly is in your hands. You can have the most beautiful space, you can have a functional space, you can have all of those things, but ultimately how we do retain patients is by building trust. And if we can build trust through all of those different elements, but also through the people that we engage with, we're responsive, we educate the people, we make sure that they feel taken care of and they trust us. I believe that in any business, that's our key to build community and retain patients and clients. All right, those were some of our frequently asked questions, and I really enjoyed answering these. And if there's any more questions that I did not answer, or if there was a question that maybe you had a follow-up question on, let us know. We'll be happy to answer them and then maybe do another video where we answer your questions.